The quiet carpenter. In the town of Millridge, where mornings began with the distant hum of sawmills and ended in the hush of lamplit porches, John Adams was known simply as the carpenter. He wasn't a man of chatter or cheer, nor one of gloom. He existed somewhere in between, measured, quiet, and dependable. Every plank he laid, every nail he drove, spoke more of him than his words ever did. His workshop sat on the edge of town, framed by towering oaks and the scent of cedarwood. Passers-by often paused to admire the intricate carvings he etched into doorframes, tiny, hidden signatures of a man who poured himself into silence. Children whispered stories about him. "He never smiles," they'd say. "Maybe he was a pirate once." Adults weren't much better. They respected him, but few truly knew him. He came to town for supplies, nodded politely, and disappeared back into the woods. John's mornings were ritual. Black coffee. Leather apron. The radio murmuring old jazz tunes in the background. But this morning, a pale envelope peeked from beneath his door, its corner curled, its paper slightly yellowed. He stood still, eyes fixed, fingers tightening around his mug. He picked it up slowly, as if the paper might burn. There was no return address. Just his name, written in delicate cursive that trembled with age, John Adams. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he placed it on the windowsill and sat at his workbench, hands resting on unmilled wood. But the tools didn't move. The jazz faded into static. Minutes passed. Finally, he opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet. Folded twice. The handwriting was careful, uncertain, like someone trying to summon the past without disturbing it. "Dear Mr. Adams. My name is Grace. I believe you knew my father once. His name was Thomas Everett." The words blurred for a moment, not from poor ink, but from the sudden wetness in John's eyes. He blinked, once, hard. Thomas Everett. That name hadn't been spoken aloud in over 20 years. It echoed now like a chisel tapping bone. He read on. Grace asked if they could meet. She said she had questions. She said she'd found his name in an old journal, her father's, and that it appeared again and again. "I think you mattered to him," she wrote. Even in silence. John folded the letter and pressed it flat with his palm. His chest ached, not sharply, but with the slow, dull weight of memory. He stood and moved to the window, the morning sun brushing against his face. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, quiet and constant. John Adams, the quiet carpenter, closed his eyes. A ghost had found him. And it had written back. The letter and the ghost. The name Thomas Everett didn't just stir old memories, it reopened a sealed chamber in John's heart. For a moment, he sat frozen, the letter from Grace crumpled softly in his hand. He hadn't said Thomas's name aloud since the war, and even now, whispering it to the empty room felt like betrayal. The past had always been something he could outbuild, layering planks of silence, brick by brick. But Grace's letter tore right through it. That night, John didn't sleep. He sat by the fire, its flicker warming nothing but his stare. His mind returned to the jungle, to the stifling heat, the bark of gunfire, the chaos stitched into every breath. He saw Thomas's face clearly, young, foolishly brave, smiling with a cigarette half lit and dreams bigger than the sky. They'd grown up together in Millridge. When the draft came, they enlisted side by side, swearing to protect each other like brothers. But war had no use for promises. It was supposed to be a routine patrol. They were ambushed. Chaos. Screams. Smoke. Thomas had been hit bad. And John, torn between dragging his friend or leading the surviving men out, made the call that haunted him to this day. He left him. Thomas had shouted, "Go," with fire in his eyes, ordering him as a soldier, not begging as a friend. But it didn't matter. Orders didn't soften guilt. John came back from the war with a chest full of medals and a soul heavy with silence. He never spoke of Thomas. Not once. It was easier to hammer nails than answer questions. But now, Grace had found him. She must have been a child then, just a baby. Maybe Thomas had written about him in letters home. Maybe his daughter had always wondered about the man who survived. The man her father had trusted enough to die for. John walked to the shelf, pulling down an old wooden box. Inside, a photograph. Two boys in uniform, arms slung over each other's shoulders. Behind them, palm trees swayed, unaware of what history was about to take. He traced Thomas's face with a trembling finger. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Morning bled into the room, cold and gray. John returned to Grace's letter and read it again, this time slower, letting every word settle. "If you're willing, I'd like to meet you. Just once. There's a bench by the old train station in Norfield. I'll be there next Saturday at 4 p.m. I won't ask you for more than you're ready to give." John folded the letter carefully, placing it back into its envelope as if it were sacred. He didn't know yet if he'd go. But for the first time in decades, the silence inside him was shifting. The journey to redemption. John hadn't boarded a train in years. The ticket agent raised an eyebrow when he handed over cash for a one-way trip to Norfield. No suitcase. Just a canvas satchel, a tin flask, and Grace's letter tucked safely into his coat pocket, close to his chest like a fragile secret. The train arrived with a sighing screech, and as John stepped aboard, the wind caught his coat like it was trying to pull him back. He hesitated, one foot on the platform, the other on the threshold of memory. Then he moved forward. The train car smelled of rust and old stories. He found a window seat and sat alone. Outside, the trees blurred into streaks of green and gray as Millridge vanished behind him. The rhythmic clatter beneath the floorboards mimicked a heartbeat he hadn't trusted in years. John watched the world shift. Hills rose, bridges came and went, rivers carved lazy paths through sleeping fields. But his eyes weren't really seeing. Inside, he was elsewhere. Back to the jungle. He could still feel the heat, the sting of sweat, the tension that never truly left his shoulders. He remembered Thomas's laugh, a deep, careless thing. He remembered the look in his eyes right before he was hit. No fear, just urgency. Just command. Go. The words still haunted him. Across the aisle, a young boy sat with his mother, tracing foggy shapes on the window. The boy turned and smiled. John managed a nod. For a fleeting moment, the boy's eyes reminded him of Thomas, alive, full of questions, untouched by loss. John reached into his satchel and pulled out the photograph again. The same one he'd held nights ago. He stared at it now, not as a relic, but as a reckoning. His hands shook, but he didn't put it away. As the train slowed near Norfield, an unfamiliar nervousness settled in his bones. He hadn't felt nervous in years, not when storm winds tore through his cabin, not even when his heart once stuttered in the dead of winter. But this was different. He stepped off the train just before 4. The station was small, almost forgotten by time. Wooden benches warped by rain. A rusted clock tower. Silence, save for the occasional crow. And then he saw her. Grace. Sitting on the bench with a book in her lap, her face tilted to the sun. She looked up as he approached. Her eyes were steady. No anger. No fear. Just a quiet expectation, as if she knew he'd come all along. John stopped a few feet away. The air between them held everything unsaid. He opened his mouth to speak, but no word. Not yet. Instead, she smiled gently and closed the book. There was room on the bench beside her. He sat down. A door opens. They sat in silence at first. Not the heavy kind that smothers. But a soft, waiting silence, like breath held at the start of something sacred. Grace didn't rush him. She watched the trees sway in the wind, her hands folded in her lap, letting him arrive in his own time. John gripped the edges of the bench. His voice, when it finally came, was low and brittle. I was with him, your father. When it happened. Grace turned to him, her eyes steady, encouraging. Not demanding. We were pinned down. He took the hit. I left him behind. The words spilled like nails from his chest, sharp, loud, and unforgiving. Each syllable was a wound reopening. His voice cracked, and he pressed a hand to his mouth, as if trying to stop the flood. I told myself it was orders. That he told me to go. But the truth is, I've lived like a coward since. I've built homes, but I couldn't rebuild what I broke. Grace was quiet. Then, softly, she reached into her bag and handed him something, a folded piece of lined paper. Old. Worn at the creases. I found this in his journal, she said. He wrote it 2 days before he died. John unfolded it with shaking fingers. It was short. Just a few lines. If anything happens to me, and John survives, I hope he forgives himself before it eats him alive. He's more than the war. He's the best man I've ever known. John's breath caught. The page trembled in his hands. His vision blurred again, but he didn't blink it away this time. Grace's voice broke the silence. He never blamed you. I never did. I just wanted to meet the man my father loved like a brother. John didn't speak.